Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior and accomplished professional from the world of the supply chain from Frankfurt, Germany, Dr. Marcell Vollmer. Marcell, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Vollmer is the CEO of the Prospitalia Group. He's also focused on the supply chain and procurement frontier, which he also refers to as navigating the future of business. He was earlier with BCG, Celonis, SAP, and DHL. So, Marcell, before we start talking supply chains, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Awesome. Shutosh, I really appreciate having this conversation with you today, and also hello and welcome from my end. So yeah, as you can hear from my strong accent, I'm a German. I'm here in Frankfurt, pretty much in the middle of Germany right now as we speak. I was born in Wiesbaden, close by, and I started my professional career after I finished my A-level, or let's be fair, even during my time at school, before I finished my A-level, I had an opportunity to work for DHL. So I got into the express business, logistics. My first contact, I would say, with supply chain at this point in time. And I continued in total 15 years in that company. It was really amazing. Having an opportunity, also starting my first managerial role, setting up customer service, centralizing certain functions, as well as working on the post-merger integration of DHL into Deutsche Post. This is where DHL, or basically the brand name DHL, is now being used instead of Deutsche Post, what it was before. After 15 years, of course, you come to a point where you decide to do something different. And I got an amazing offer from SAP to join them, setting up their shared service center, centralizing and reorganizing the back office functions. First starting in EMEA, the European, Middle East, Africa region, and then expanding the scope to a really global organization. And I moved on also when SAP decided to do post-merger integrations or acquisitions, that I was post-merger integration lead. And really helping here to integrate business objects and Sybase. I was the overall integration lead, market leader for analytics, and the other one, Sybase, for mobile.
Right.
After a certain period in time, of course, you need also to think about a more functional approach. I was running a kind of strategic in-house consulting organization, and I got asked, after we have done so much to focus on the cost side, the optimization for SAP's P&L. 2/3 of the P&L is personal expenses. This was my core focus, but there's another third, which is external spend. And this is why I got asked from my boss, the group CFO, to take on the role as Chief Procurement Officer. Amazing opportunity for me. Really to focus now on all the spend, and I restructured the procurement function and moved then, was part of the acquisition of Ariba, Concur, to acquire these companies as well as to integrate them. I continued as CEO to really do the integration work out of Atlanta, Georgia. It was an amazing time to live there with my wife, and moved on as Chief Digital Officer before I decided to leave after 14 years SAP. Joining Celonis, you mentioned them. It's a market leader for process analytics, process mining, Chief Innovation Officer. And I continued then, getting asked from BCG, Boston Consulting Group, to become a partner and director. An amazing opportunity really to go into strategy consulting. And probably I would still continue doing that if I would not have gotten an opportunity from private equity owned company group to take on, and it's basically a combination between procurement and hospitals providing medical devices and everything what's needed on the procurement side in the healthcare industry. So great to be here, and I hope it was not too long, but you see,
how amazing! What an amazing journey to have worked with such amazing global iconic companies. So let's talk supply chains now. My first question to you, Marcell, is how, in your view, has the role of the supply chain leader evolved over the years? I remember 4 decades ago when I started work, it used to be purchase manager. Now it's evolved into a chief supply chain officer and a very critical role in the C-suite. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that supply chain management is now really a critical role. We have seen this in the pandemic, for example, and I think supply chain procurement was on the top of the agenda for every CEO or C-level executive due to one simple reason. We had to define risk mitigation strategies. We have seen that during COVID, entire harbors, the largest harbor in the world, Shanghai, got closed. By that, the entire trade between Asia and Europe came more or less to a standstill or heavily impacted, let's say it in that way. And by that, you see how critical it is really to define the right strategies that you can keep the lights on in your business. Because when you're a manufacturing business, when you produce goods, you are dependent on getting supplies from all over the world. And if one part is basically no longer functioning due to COVID, we have even seen in Europe that borders got closed. That's definitely something where we see how important supply chain management is. But I think this is now a critical situation, a crisis. There were much more crises what we have seen. When I started becoming Chief Procurement Officer, there was Fukushima, 2011.
Correct.
Same year, a few weeks later, by the way, there was a flood in Thailand. We learned that we haven't had really the full transparency about also the supplier data. We knew, of course, our tier one suppliers, so suppliers we are directly doing business with, but we weren't aware about who are the tier two suppliers, so the suppliers of your suppliers.
Right.
This is a hard way where a lot of companies learned it. And so what I want to say is that basically you see that it is very critical for supply chain managers to have transparency in the data. You have also much more data available. And by that, the businesses are seeing how critical it is to really use the insights, ensure that you run the logistics in the most professional possible way, that you save money, and that you also focus on future trends like sustainability. If CO2 becomes a price, basically you need to factor this in, how you want on your supply chain, and how do you want to really ensure that everything for your business is arriving in time, wherever it's needed, of course, in the quality you have purchased it. And this is basically the critical role, but also distribution at the end of your ready products or services, depending what you do, that you provide this globally.
Well said. And based on all your experience, and as you mentioned, I think there have been, since in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a challenge every year of some kind for supply chain leaders. What, in your opinion, are some of the key challenges supply chain leaders have faced in today's rapidly changing business environment?
I think in the past it was very critical, and you mentioned purchasing, a great example of that, just to get everything what is needed in time. So now we see there's much more. We know that in automotive we had the just-in-time production. We have seen also now how critical it is that you get all the supplies to a defined point in time at your factory to really do your manufacturing processes, in that case in automotive, of course, to produce your cars. We have seen really the evolution of supply chain, how it gets more and more important. And I would say now with the resilience, I mentioned sustainability as an example, to really have an end-to-end responsibilities also showing on the C-suite level. And I couldn't agree more that now a chief supply chain officer is part of the executive board, the executive management team. Depending on the company, of course, there are differences around the world, how this is defined. But basically, I couldn't agree more on the importance of a chief supply chain officer, as well as also an integration with the procurement function. For me, to keep it very simple, to define supply chain, I don't want to lecture anyone, but I always like to keep it simple also for myself to understand it. Supply chain is 4 words. It is plan, it is source, it is make, and it's deliver. These are the 4 critical elements of a supply chain. When I talk about procurement, the sourcing side is basically what procurement does.
Yeah.
But basically, you need to look at one end-to-end process. And to keep it simple, I think 4 words describe it very well. It's not describing the complexity behind that, because this is really very high complexity from R&D, the development of goods, from really also sourcing, driving supplier innovations. By the way, one of our most used items nowadays, and that's a smartphone, what I'm holding in my hand, the Gorilla Glass is a beautiful example what Steve Jobs did, or Tim Cook, when he was Chief Supply Chain Officer for Apple. He developed with Corning the Gorilla Glass. That's the reason why we can really use smartphones in the way we're using it.
Correct.
Also, we see the evolution. By the way, Tim Cook is a beautiful example also that from a Chief Supply Chain Officer role, you can make the next level to become a CEO. And I think that's also another great a great way to elevate your career and bring it to the next level.
What an amazing example you've given, Marcell, on Tim Cook. I mean, from a Chief Supply Chain Officer to a CEO, but not only CEO, but CEO of the world's largest company. What an amazing, thank you for sharing this example. My next question for you is, how is technology shaping the future of supply chain, especially with automation, artificial intelligence, and blockchain?
These are great buzzwords on the technology you mentioned. And when you look also where supply chain management started, by the way, you could go basically back until the Silk Road when you talk about supply chain. Think about that. You haven't had really data. You were basically dependent that everything what you have on the goods and what you want to bring from A to B, that it arrives there in time, and you haven't had really the transparency about the exact date and time. Of course, you were also very much dependent on whether on animals, horses, whatever you have used at this point in time. When you look nowadays, how this has evolved on the technology side, I think we are using every possible way of transportation. So from planes, from ships, from cars, from trucks, but also still humans are doing the end-to-end logistics. When you look who is bringing your mail every day, or the packages from an Amazon driver or Alibaba driver, whoever this does. Basically, that's how you get everything. And you see that also the technology you need to really run your distribution, your logistics on that has evolved tremendously. Now we have real-time access to data. Basically, everything started with scanning, that you had barcodes on the packages, that okay, I got a package, it arrived at an airport, for example, or at a logistics center, and basically now I have it on another truck, and it goes now to a factory, probably for continuation of production before the end product gets then to the customer, whoever ordered it. And this is also where you see you need data on that, and you have now access to the data for every single point in time during the journey of your supply chain. And what can you do with all the data, descriptive data? I think we don't have a shortage on descriptive data. We have tons of that. But what we don't have is really meaningful insights. And how can we get this? Basically, we need technologies like algorithms, machine learning, artificial intelligence. We also bring it in a structured way. So first of all, to really see what are the critical information I need to know. If there is a very bad weather in India today or in China, basically my ship might not arrive in time, or the truck gets stuck. So therefore, if I know it right now, it is helping me also that I can do the planning. I'm in the healthcare industry. Think about that. A patient in need, if you don't have the medical supplies needed, this patient might not have a second chance, depending on the criticality of his personal or her personal condition.
Correct.
And therefore, you need to have a chance to prepare yourself, and this means you need to have access to data, and you only can work with the data if you get them in a meaningful, insightful way, and therefore you need technology. With blockchain, and that's one of my favorite topics, where you really have, and I like more to talk about a distributed ledger. The reason for that is that it is more describing what you do. Blockchain is very often, and which is true, by the way, it is part of Bitcoin. This is the underlying technology. But distributed ledger is probably more describing that you have every single step during the process of your goods, or in the time that you really have data points. And also the distributed ledger helps you that these data can't be changed afterwards. And why is this critical? When you want to ensure, for example, that you have sustainable products, take palm oil as an example. That's a beautiful example. Palm oil, you get it all over in the world. But when you want to ensure it's sustainable, you need to know where's the farmer, where you get it from.
Correct.
And how do you transport it? And therefore, a distributed ledger helps you to monitor every single step and also to ensure, okay, this is a quantity of palm oil I got from this farmer. It got in a ship. And by the way, palm oil is palm oil, sustainable or not sustainable. And that's very often also where it's a little bit getting into the mix of the definition. But if you can say, you can't differentiate if this palm oil is sustainable or not sustainable. But if you want to ensure, okay, this is a quantity I bought at a farmer somewhere in Asia, this is the quantity, this was on this ship, and it's the same quantity, assuming that basically you can ensure in a Haber in Europe or in the United States, wherever it goes, okay, this is still the quantity of palm oil I have here, and I know where it comes from. This is sustainable palm oil. And how do you measure that? Therefore, you need technology like blockchain or the distributed ledger technology to help you here to have the transparency.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. My next question to you is on sustainability and ethics in a supply chain. You know, more and more buyers or supply chain leaders are becoming conscious of sustainability in the supply chain and ethical practices that are to be used from the suppliers. I'd love to get your thoughts on how important sustainability and ethics is, and how can supply chain leaders ensure their own standards?
That's a great question, and I couldn't agree more on the importance what you mentioned. And the reason for that is pretty simple. On the one side, of course, you can argue you have certain regulations. I can give you an example here for my region in Europe. Basically, we have the Supply Chain Act, where we need to stick to the transparency and need to ensure that we also are hold accountable for working conditions in a factory wherever we get it. This is depending on a certain size of your business, what you have. But I would say the regulatory side, this is something what the government does. In that case, the EU, the European Union. But on the other side, there's one aspect which is more important. Consumers are looking now, where do they get the products from? What are the working conditions? And is it now that we have sustainable products? And therefore, you have basically two very important elements on ethics I would include here, that you have regulatory requirements, but you have the consumer who wants to know, where does my product come from and what are the working conditions? And you need to combine that. Of course, you always need to stick to the regulatory requirements. There's not so much to negotiate on that, nothing to be clear. But on the other side, a consumer is the most powerful stakeholder in that game, due to a simple reason. If the consumer says, hey, I don't buy your clothes anymore, I don't buy your food anymore because I do not agree with the way how you produce it, basically then you are running out of business. And therefore, it is very important also that you define high standards on ethics, that you also make it transparent, that you comply with the regulatory requirements, and also that you use it to make a transparency for your consumers. Hey, that's what we do and how we stick to that. I think the most prominent example is sustainability and ESG, environmental, social, governmental. These are KPIs. In the meantime, I think every company, every larger company is using them. Or you could also say the 17 goals from the United Nations, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. these are great examples also on how to really ensure that we take care as businesses of our planet, of the resources we have access to, and also that we ensure that we manage it in a sustainable way for the products or services, whatever we produce.
Thank you. My next question to you is on mitigation of risk. We have now just started to come out of COVID, and I know supply chain leaders have had huge challenges. In Europe, you're facing a different kind of a challenge on your doorstep with the war going on. How, in your opinion, should supply chain leaders mitigate risk?
Another great question. And I think we have seen COVID as a beautiful example. We haven't had really full transparency about our supply chains, the suppliers, as well as the suppliers of our suppliers.
Correct.
What we have seen is that it can happen, the so-called black swan events. By the way, COVID is a beautiful example, but there's much more. I mentioned Fukushima. I mentioned the flood in Thailand. One single ship, the Ever Given, a ship from the Evergreen shipping company in the Suez Canal.
Correct.
We all basically brought the entire trade between Asia and Europe to a standstill. One ship is enough. And I think these are examples, and you mentioned the war in the Ukraine or Russia against the Ukraine, what we have right now. However, all this is showing us one thing. Basically, we need to have the full transparency about our suppliers, the supplies, and also think about what is happening in an event that we are not getting the goods needed in time. Do we have a diverse set of suppliers? Can we mitigate shortage or basically a stop from one supplier delivering it? I had a call with a CPO, Chief Procurement Officer from a large European conglomerate. And basically he told me, hey, Marcell, the Ever Given was an interesting example also for us internally. It took him 3 hours to exactly know what containers on that ship were for his company, what was in these containers, and also to give his team a very clear direction, what is now the impact. So the Ever Given is not arriving in time. And by the way, he was not only saying, because he is a very future-oriented Chief Procurement Officer, he was not only looking just into what's happening with this ship and the containers on that ship. There were ships also behind the Ever Given, waiting to go through the Suez Canal, not arriving in time. But now, one step further, there are also ships in the Mediterranean Sea. They're waiting to go through the Suez Canal, and basically they could not leave in time. And by that, there is no way to arrive in time if you get stuck in the Mediterranean Sea and can't pass the Suez Canal. And by that, we have seen how important it is to really have the transparency of the data. So it's, again, the data, also technology you need, algorithms, artificial intelligence to work with the data, and then to define risk mitigation strategies. And you better do this in advance before an event happens. No, and I'm not telling you that black swan events, you can predict something like that. I don't believe that it's happening. What you can do is, with the transparency you can get, you are able to define alternative product substitutes. In healthcare, for example, we created a list of substitutes for different products to ensure, okay, this is not available, we can replace it. You can replace one implant from one manufacturer by another one. And when you now go further down and do this for all the different products, probably it's not possible to really provide substitutes for everything. But at least these are things you can prepare, and showing how important it is to think about the risk mitigation strategies to become more resilient for your company.
Very interesting. So Marcell, I have time for one more question. And this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. As someone who has studied supply chains so closely, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of young supply chain professionals who are, entering the world of supply chains to learn from your experiences and your journey?
That's a great question. And I hope also this podcast contributes a little bit to motivate more people.
I'm sure it will.
For a young professional, I'm happy to give my advice and my 2 cents to that. Number one is supply chain management for me, including procurement, is probably the most beautiful place you can start your career, because there is no other place I know where you have a better overview about what your business does, understanding and learning more about the stakeholders from the planning, what I mentioned. You understand the development of your products, the sourcing side. You have an interaction with all the suppliers where you get products from, the manufacturing side, as well as then the distribution at the end, basically the delivery side. So basically, this is the best place where you can start your career. I'm advertising supply chain management. Definitely, I do that. But on the other side, I'm not saying that you should continue your career in that. If you have a chance to really look and understand the business model, basically then you have also contact to the different stakeholders. You can also think about a change of your career to get experience in operations, manufacturing. You can also go to sales, and probably you want to go to some of the back office functions like finance, HR, IT. Also great places to work, no doubt about that. I think it's a beautiful place to start. The second one I would say is I haven't seen any better place to really get in touch with so many emerging disruptive technologies than supply chain management. We mentioned some of the buzzwords, big data, the empirical data, where we need machine learning, artificial intelligence. We mentioned blockchain, distributed ledger technology. There's IoT and now 5G, how all the devices are getting connected. Wearable, you basically have also a chance to be connected 24/7. Or your products are connected 24/7. This is really also where you have a chance to really look at the tech side. And you might also be attracted and say, hey, wow, I want to do more on the technology side. There's nothing better than also understand how the technology is used. Third element, and I think probably that's even the most important, is we know how important it is that we keep our world, our planet intact, and therefore we need to think about the right way to drive sustainability matters right now. All the companies are doing that. Regulatory requirements are there, and we have goals, and we see also climate change. I think it is pretty obvious that we have definitely lots of critical components we need to take care of. How can you oversee that? Basically, a supply chain gives you an opportunity to understand what exactly is it, what the logistic means, the ships, the consumption of the gas, what you need, the energy for your production. Basically, the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So scope 1, 2 is what you have internally in your company. Scope 3 is what you get from suppliers, as well as what you have as CO2 emissions when you deliver your goods to your customers. Basically, another great opportunity for someone starting a career, get into that field and also make a difference, create really impact by what you do and how you take the decisions. And in supply chain management, you can do that very early. I hope this motivates, and I want to invite everyone at least to look at it and hopefully also get attracted by the supply chain function.
Wonderful. And on that note, Marcell, and your amazing lessons where you said supply chain is the most beautiful place to start your career. Think about moving to other roles later on. And the story you gave me of Tim Cook and Apple was such a fabulous story. Second, you said was the supply chain is one of the best places to be able to understand and study disruptive technology. And the third one, you said as supply chain leaders, you can really play a role to drive sustainability. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I love the 4 points you gave me about the components of supply chain, which are plan, solve, make, and deliver. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of technology, artificial intelligence, the role of a supply chain leader, the distributed ledgers, and so many different aspects of supply chain. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Josh, many thanks for having me. I hope it's interesting for our listeners, and it was really great having this discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.